AI is the ultimate false memory machine because what it can do is it can personalize everything to you, the worst things that we're capable of. Crime, murder, serial killing, sexual assault. What that opens the door for is who are we as human beings? That is something I explore, is basically how any one of us is capable of the worst things we can think of. Even if I'm framing it as, and this person got murdered, even then people go, yeah, but it's about the trees though, isn't it?
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. Your memory isn't a recording, it's a story redrafted every time you tell it. A decade ago, a psychologist proved how easy the rewrite is. 3 friendly interviews, a few leading questions, and most of her volunteers remembered a crime that had never happened. That technique's now in everyone's pocket, dressed as a helpful AI assistant. My guest today is scientist Dr. Julia Shaw, criminal psychologist, author of The Memory Illusion, presenter of the BBC's Bad People, and the expert the police and the International Criminal Court call when memory cannot be trusted. Julia also wrote a book on the history of bisexuality, founded an AI company, presented a variety of true crime shows, and played detective in a crime comedy with Ramesh Ranganathan. She spent her career keeping false stories out of court. Now, she says we've built the ultimate false memory machine. Julia, welcome. Tell me a story.
Picture this. You are in an office in a university building, and you've been asked to be there because you're part of an experiment. And the experiment is about childhood and early adolescent memories. I'm sitting across from you, and what I'm doing is I've told you that you committed a crime, and you tell me that you can't remember it. And I go, no, but you can remember it. Let me try this imagination exercise. And I get you to close your eyes, and I get you to picture what it was like and where it could have been. I tell you it was autumn. Maybe you're picturing the leaves. Maybe you're picturing that it's cold outside. I tell you that you assaulted someone, and I ask you who it could have been. And you start to picture people from your childhood and adolescence, and you start to think, maybe it could have been Tim. Maybe it could have been Anna. Maybe it could have been this person. And every time you say anything, I go, very good. And I keep going, and I get you to picture, okay, so you assault someone with a weapon. What might that have been? And a weapon can be anything. It can be a rock. It can be a knife. It can be, and you start to picture what Anna or Tim or Tom could have used to potentially attack you, or you could have used to attack them. And then over time, I get you to picture the complexity of this memory. And 3 weeks later, you're telling me that you committed a crime that never happened. And in vivid detail, you're telling me exactly who you assaulted, why you assaulted them, and which weapon you used. What I found most interesting in doing this research was that one of the very first details that I got was that someone was sitting in front of me and she was picturing autumn, because every time it was autumn in my memories. And she just said, I remember a blue sky. And that was the first moment in my implantation studies of false memory that I realized, this is going to work.
Gosh, this is slightly unnerving me because I'm now almost doubting every memory that I've got. So that was like an experiment revealing itself to be something that is true, that perhaps most people watching and listening to this show don't realise. Give us a bit more about that. What does that actually mean?
So the story I just told you is part of one of the first studies I did on false memories, and that was part of my PhD work. And I was interested in how we tell ourselves stories about our own past and how that can influence the things that happen in criminal justice settings. And so I was working on the intersection of false memories and false confessions. So when we confess to crimes that never happened. And what I'm interested in is just how we can, through leading and suggestive interviews, become convinced that things happened to us or that we did things that just never happened or didn't happen in that way. And I think in terms of storytelling, what it shows us is that ultimately what we like are compelling stories. We don't like gaps. And so if there is a gap in our memory, or somebody else's memory for that matter, or a piece of history where we're trying to figure out what happened in that period, and it's very, very difficult to figure it out, we like an answer. And if we're not sure and we can't access the original version, we don't have, something written down from the time, we don't have a video recording of the incident, we start to maybe guess at it. And that guessing can turn into thinking, well, yeah, that's probably what happened. And our brains are really good at forgetting the probably. And after a couple of times telling the same story, we can quite quickly move into that is what happened.
So this is science fact. A whole bunch of us go around the whole time with gaps being filled with fictional, made-up moments and memories we believe to be true, but in fact, they've just joined the dots.
Literally all the time. Every single day you're doing this. And in most contexts, it doesn't really matter because...
Feels like it matters.
Well, it doesn't matter because our brains aren't made for perfection. Our brains are made for what are called gist memories. So they're made to remember in general what's happening. And in general, what is a glass? What is a table? Who are you? And that is usually the level at which that sort of level of abstraction is what we need in order to function in society and to make good decisions. But we're quite bad at verbatim memories, so the precise details of things that happen to us. And when we then need to recall those details, like in a courtroom, that's when suddenly we realize just how vague our memories often are. But again, the reason that we have this is because intelligence and problem solving rely on abstraction, not on precision.
The huge implications when you're mentioning things like a courtroom and the justice system. What are the implications of that? And have you been closely involved in such implications?
Yeah, the implications of that are when you're then asked to sit in a courtroom or to make a witness statement. So you go into a police station and the police have done a cognitive interview typically, which is what we do in the UK. And they've asked you non-leading, non-suggestive questions. Let's assume the police are doing a great job, which in fairness, in places like England, the police do an amazing job most of the time. And that's partly because around 2000, they started talking to us and said, hey, how does memory actually work? And how do we make sure that we actually do evidence-based interviewing? And so they came up with achieving best evidence and the cognitive interview principles, which I think now, the other way around, other industries should take, because we have this wonderful protocol for getting reliable information out of people without contaminating it in the process of the interview. And it's really evidence-based. It's mostly scripted. So you can just take it and apply it to other circumstances. And it's heavily, heavily tested. So let's say you've gone through all that. The police officer has been perfect. You've made your witness statement. It can still be filled with mistakes or errors or confabulations. And that's where I think people maybe overestimate, because things feel real, they feel emotional, they feel important. And so we assume that if something important and emotional happened, that we must be able to remember it as a coherent and accurate story. But actually, quite often, even there, we've added little bits, we've tweaked little bits, and sometimes the whole thing's made up.
It feels like ironic that we are talking about this right in the heart of an seismic change in society, full stop, with artificial intelligence. And the perhaps irony is the accusations of large language models being that they hallucinate. And it feels like doing something similar to what you're describing that we're doing on any given day anyway, in terms of our brains. How are you perceiving this? Because people are talking about cognitive decline as we're becoming immediately reliant and only using our ChatGPT to fill in the blanks anyway. Should we be concerned?
AI is the ultimate false memory machine, because what it can do is it can personalize everything to you. So if you've used it for any period of time and your chat interface, your LLM, knows you, it can not only write in a style that it knows you like the most, but also if you ask it to, for example, help you record a memory, or to work through something, or even to coach you for something at work. So help me work through, how to do this presentation, how to do this meeting. It can very quickly introduce pieces of information that you never mentioned. So it might say, oh, as you wanted, I did this. And you might go, oh yeah, I guess I could have wanted that. I must have wanted that. And basically that's a small false memory where it's sort of convinced you that the thing that it's giving you is in fact the thing you asked for, even though it might not be. And that's on a very small level. But on a higher level, what we're seeing is that in legal settings, so whether it's in workplaces or in courtrooms, we're seeing that witness statements are increasingly generated or smoothed using AI.
Gosh, explain. As in, is this what, the last 12 months?
The last 12 months, yeah. This is incredibly recent.
Yeah.
And lawyers are sort of pulling their hair out trying to figure out what to do with this.
Yeah.
Because it's always been an issue where people sort of write down things and talk about something that happened repeatedly, whether they've witnessed something or they've been accused of something, or they're claiming to have been victimized in a certain
Until it
way.
almost becomes real through their repetitive writing or speaking of that moment.
And it certainly becomes smoothed. So you get sort of this version which you wouldn't have said the first time you told the story, and isn't 100% a recollection or a factually accurate recollection of what happened. It's the sort of version that has been made as a story to share. And we do that quite naturally. This isn't a malicious thing most of the time. I mean, it can also be a lie. It can also be intentional. But most of the time, we're doing this quite naturally because we're social creatures. And the thing we love most of all is to have social praise, is to be seen as interesting, is to have someone nodding across from us going, yes, very good. Tell me more. And as soon as we're not getting that, we start changing our stories quite naturally.
Gosh.
And that's mostly a good thing. But in the context of factual accuracy, that can be a really big problem.
So we're walking around with false memories, becoming increasingly dependent on the ultimate false memory machines, filling in the blanks of memories that aren't even real in the first place. Where does that end?
I mean, AI is the ultimate false memory machine, but it's also
Give me the good bit.
amazing way to administer things like the cognitive interview. And so rather than relying on you just sitting on your own, taking notes about what happened in an important emotional event, you can now say to your LLM, administer the cognitive interview to me. It's very important that I preserve the accuracy of this memory,
Wow.
that nothing is distorted. Make sure you stick to scientific principles and you administer the cognitive interview.
So that's where the involvement of human becomes paramount.
Well, and we need to resist the AI smoothing of everything. And I think we're already having an allergic reaction to it when we start
agree.
seeing it. I mean, if I go to conferences and there's an obvious AI image in the background, maybe 2 years ago I would have gone, oh, that's pretty cool. Now I just see it as kind of lazy.
I agree.
And it's the same with people writing speeches, or if it
You hear the
feels like
syntax
AI.
in a second. I have a sleep podcast. And it's suddenly annoyed, and I used to love it, and it suddenly annoyed me because I'm like, oh no, this is entirely out of GPT because I can recognize the syntax, and I'm suddenly not sleeping well again.
And now you're just worrying about the future of AI.
Yeah, I've got bigger issues.
Yeah,
probably.
existential dread creeps in as you're trying to sleep.
LinkedIn's a great example, a necessary evil for many of us, but a good friend of mine who used to write the best blogs in the worlds of music and culture had been very busy and become a dad and hadn't written for years, and then pops back on LinkedIn and it's like, oh wow, he's back. And I start reading, I'm like, oh, within 3 lines I realize it's at least partially AI, and I just stopped reading because it wasn't almost a choice. I was just turned off immediately.
Well, and that's because what we are reacting to is that it feels lazy and it feels inauthentic. Because it is. It's both of those things often. Even though sometimes it can take people an hour to craft that same statement. And if they'd just written it, it actually would have been fine. It would have been good, and people would have read it. And it might have taken less time. And so it isn't even necessarily a sign of laziness, but it is, you're not investing that cognitive piece that we want from people, which is ultimately what you're trying to share.
Do you see that only increasing the distance people want to have from the technology?
Well, we have a real cognitive dissonance when it comes to how we react to AI. So the majority of people now are using some sort of LLM on a regular basis. And so whether that's, kids who are allowed to access their phones, or students at universities, or my grandma's no longer alive, but my mom's using it every
Really?
day. And I think we know that there's a gender gap where more men are using it than women, especially
Really?
at the older ages. But overall, this is just such a pervasive thing that's happening. And I think most people, most of the time, love it. And it's kind of replaced search engines for a lot of things. And also search engines are now struggling because there's so much AI slop that it's quite difficult for a human to go through the internet and to find what we want. It's easier for an AI, partly because it's now designed for AI. So we're getting this real interesting feedback loop where it's sort of pushing us into the use of LLMs. But I also think that the negativity around it is partly just what happens with any new technology is that people go, but what about the risks? Which is absolutely what we should be thinking about. But the risks that we end up focusing on are almost invariably at the wrong level. we start talking about things like AI psychosis, which is such a remote use case, which is where people are using AI and it's being sycophantic. So it's telling you what it thinks you want to hear, saying that all your delusions are in fact correct, and you go into a psychotic spiral.
And you think that's rare and that's not a concern?
I know it's rare. And a lot of chatbots have built-in safeguards to prevent that from happening as much as possible. And so you already often have to have sort of circumnavigated those safeguards on purpose to even get that kind of spiral. And
what about the displacement of relationships full stop? The ease with which you can...
Again,
you think
just
that,
nonsense.
That's good to hear. I know people like Scott Galloway talk a lot about that, worrying about effectively companionship and people frankly giving up on doing the basic things in life. Like
Absolutely not. Again, it's what are you comparing it to? I mean, are you comparing it to the same person who might have been in a chat room 20 years ago, who might 10 years ago have spent too much time on social media, who now is spending time with an LLM? We're not replacing actual human interactions with these things most of the time. I mean, it's the same thing with the sycophantic therapist. When are people using ChatGPT or Claude or other tools to be a therapist and to talk them through their existential dread? It's 3 a.m. in bed in your pajamas. That is not a time you will have access to a human being. And so if you are spiraling, most of the time it's probably going to be really good for you. And so, yeah, we can focus on we should be aware of the risks of some of the stuff. Absolutely. But on the other hand, the amount of lives that have almost certainly been saved because people now have access to a therapist for free at basically any time.
See, this is amazing. I love how enthused you are that there's real positive to come from that.
Well, and it's making sure that you understand the prompts that you're using. And so as a memory researcher, saying to it, not just help me remember this, but use the cognitive interview. And of course, if you're not an expert, you might go, well, how would I know to ask for that? And the answer is, ask it, what are some of the main theories based on research from recent years, ideally, from the last 20 years or last 10 years, along the thing that I'm trying to do. Ask it about that first. And then once it's explained maybe the theories to you, maybe you've even gone and checked Google Scholar to see if those are real and also that they're actually legitimate good theories. Either way, you then pick one of those theories and say, in line with that theory, ask me this or do this. I mean, it's the same with therapy. I mean, I ask specifically about cognitive behavior therapy and Gestalt therapy, and I tell it to avoid psychoanalysis because that's not a category that I want or like.
Take me back a little bit then to when then did you first really, if you like, integrate with the world of artificial intelligence as part of your work and test your nous with it and play with it? Has this been years in the making?
So since 2016 is sort of the year that I would say is the easiest. 10
years. That's a long time.
Oh, yeah, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's a decade.
It is a decade. Wow. Yeah, I guess it is. I was going around the world working with lawyers and military officers who go into war zones and have to bring home important information that isn't contaminated, so memories.
Wow.
I was working with police officers, training them on how to do better investigative interviewing so they don't contaminate evidence.
Wow.
I was working and doing presentations at the ICC, the International Criminal Court. But everywhere I was going, sure, I was telling them how to do it better, how to do interviewing better. But mostly I was going around telling everyone how terrible their memories are.
Really?
And that we shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that and avoid this and avoid that. And at some point, obviously, everyone's asking me also on a sort of individual level, but Julia, how do we preserve memories?
Sure.
And so I thought, well, given that the cognitive interview is effectively already a scripted interview, guess what does that kind of thing really well? And so a chatbot administers scripts incredibly well, much better than a human being. And we know from research on the cognitive interview that even people who are trained in it, where they're trained to, for example, not interrupt someone where they're in a free recall phase. So if you're telling a story, don't interrupt. And that includes not going, yes.
Really?
And even interviewers who are trained not to do that, because we know it interrupts people's flow, they do it on average every 7 seconds.
Gosh. But is that because it's like reinforcement bias by just acknowledging what they're saying? If there is an inaccuracy or a discrepancy, that you're reinforcing something that's wrong? Or you just need to give them that space of recall full stop?
Well, yeah, you need to give them space of recall. And anything that has a potential to interrupt them or to be a stop is bad. You're sort of reliving the moment. You don't want to bring them back into now.
Got you.
You want to leave them in the past so that they can sort of rummage
How
around.
did you deal with when you were dealing with the very, very harsh topics, by the way? Did that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, I still work as a criminal psychologist as an expert witness on cases. And the cases are often sometimes historic in nature, sometimes sexual in nature, sometimes things like kidnappings. The war criminals and warlords, I wasn't involved in the actual memories themselves because that was all relatively secret.
Yeah.
I was involved in training the people who went abroad and did the interviews and collected basically the intelligence agents, the sort of not secret agents, but intelligence agents.
Yeah.
And they had all these misconceptions around memory. And I came in annually and trained them up on. So each new cohort, I would train them on how to remember things better for extreme situations.
So you were playing with really early versions of what we all know now, and you were playing with the notion of chatbots and realizing these are excellent ways to frankly document in a way that is actually precise and real whilst allowing people to reveal themselves. Has it been transformative in these last 3 years now that everyone is across it? We've all got these maybe slightly broken, but memory machines in our pockets. We're playing with them every day.
Honestly, because almost no one uses AI correctly for memory stuff. Part of the problem is that we all now have this incredible tool and none of us have been taught how to use it. And so we're just sort of guesstimating at what we can do with it and what prompts we should use. And so what's changed is that when I started the startup called Talk to Spot, or just Spot, which is now used by the Bar Council. So all the barristers in England use it to report to other so it's used within the legal profession. It's also used within human rights commissions, and it's used within big multinationals to report inappropriate behavior and other incidents at work. It seemed like such an obvious thing at the time in 2016, 2017. To me, well, because we could see where tech was going. And again, we had this template and you could just translate it. And then at the time we had to do research and wanted to do research because I'm always interested in whether, the thing that seems obvious doesn't necessarily work. So you still need to do experiments. And so what we did at Spot, together with Rashid Minas and Camilla Elphick, who are two PhDs in criminal psychology as well, we did research on this tool. And we're coming against people saying no one's going to talk to a chatbot about important emotional experiences.
Isn't that interesting?
That is what everyone was telling us.
I can kind of believe that thought. That sort of makes sense.
And they were like, no, you need the human, you need rapport, you need trust, you need all of these things. And we were going, but you can have rapport and trust with machines. Like, people have long reported falling in love with, even the very first chatbot, Eliza, people told her how much they loved her, even though it was literally just saying, that sounds very hard, tell me more, and had no natural language processing at all. And so we were going, okay, but we need to test this. Let's see if people will talk about these important emotional experiences. And lo and behold, they did. And we found that not only that, but people were remembering more details because you could ask this perfect interview. And so what it represented was this tool that actually, it wasn't doing something that humans were already doing and replacing it. It was giving people an evidence-based tool to supplement their work in a way that didn't exist before. It's this whole new thing, doing something that humans are bad at so that humans can better deal with problems. And that now seems so obvious. And what's so nice is that now I talk about Spot and people go, yeah, of course.
It's a technology in a way to make us more human. You have this positivity. Do you think it comes from what you know? Have you always just been like that?
Psychologically speaking, we know from research that either disengaging from things, so being disillusioned, or being angry or fearful tends to have a negative effect on behavior. In other words, the more afraid and the more disengaged you are, the less you actually do to control the world that we're building or to take sort of an active participatory role. And that's what we don't want. And it's the same in environmental issues. The idea that sort of people just get despondent about what's happening to the planet, that is a recipe for inaction. And that is exactly the opposite of what we need. I'd rather you be a bit angry. Angry is okay. Afraid is mostly bad. And despair, very bad. Depression, also bad. Those are all things that make you do less. And that is not where we need to be on an emotional spectrum of, influencing the world. I also know the people who make this stuff. So I have been part of people who make AI tools. I also know a lot of scientists working in this. I also know lots of the people who work in the AI spaces. And yes, there are some people who are shady and have ethically questionable sort of through lines, but there's a lot of hyper intelligent people. And some of my closest friends who are very also socially and ethically sound and who really do think and want to build a tool that is going to improve humanity. And knowing that, I think it's harder to think, this is all just for money. This is all just going to destroy humanity recklessly. That I don't think that, because I know the people who are actually making it.
Do you think it's in stark contrast to the big tech social media era that we've definitely lived through? Like, how do you feel about the comparable tech, if you like, in the world that we're in now versus then?
I think that, the tech side is one angle, but the other side is who are the people who are building these machines? And frankly, Meta was started by someone who started a website, which was basically Hot or Not. So it wasn't like...
Anyone who doesn't remember Hot or Not, it went wild in about 1999. It was just a face comparison.
It was literally, do you think this person is sexy or not?
Yeah.
And that is it. And that then sort of morphed into this university networking party tool, and then that morphed into this other thing. Sure. It's really... The trajectory is basically frat boy has success and now is in charge of politics. Yeah. And that is just a trajectory where... it's not shocking that perhaps...
You say it like that. It's quite an unsurprising conclusion.
Right. And so I think that is the opposite of what we're seeing with the founders of big AI organizations at the moment. The people who are interested in LLMs, most of the core founders, whether we agree with their politics or not, genuinely want to and think they are going to revolutionize and improve humanity. And they are interested in, effective altruism. Again, lots of critique of that as well. But the idea that, what is it that I could do that will maximize my contribution to humanity? That is very different than I'm going to make a website that's hot or not. And I do trust those people more because they are coming from a better place. The internet also initially was like porn and cat pics. So slightly different.
It was a crazy, insane place. It's a very early version, that cowboyish, garish, utterly interruptive.
You couldn't find anything.
Just utter uselessness. It was a weirdly entertaining trip that you would go on.
Do you remember Stumble Upon?
Of course, Stumble Upon.
Stumble Upon was amazing.
It was the best.
Because it would just randomly give you websites that it had indexed and be like, what about this one? What about this one?
Best.
What about this one? And you just keep going. And it felt like this infinite meander through different parts of the internet. I feel like for those who don't know what we're talking about, Stumble Upon was this tool. It was this website where you would just press a button and it would pull up a random website.
But literally random.
I'm sure there were some parameters, but because it was so hard to find people's websites and to find even products and other things, you couldn't find it otherwise. And so Stumble Upon would just be this randomizer. And you'd find the most weird and wonderful
things. This was
things.
also the era where everything looked different. Nothing was the same.
And I think a lot of people had that experience when we first had DALL-E and we first had image generation a couple of years ago, where people felt, me included, immensely creative because also you didn't know exactly what it was going to do.
Yeah.
And that itself was quite a thrill. And still, the idea that you can just create something visual that you wouldn't have been able to create before, especially as someone who maybe isn't good at digital art, or even someone who is, being able to create new aspects of it, zoom out, create, sort of play with it.
You seem so artistic and creative. And I think I read that you wanted to be... Didn't you want to study art? But
I did, yeah.
You were put off it. But everything, for a doctor, criminal psychologist, science-based superstar that you are, you do approach things with a certain creativity, it feels. Is that fair to say, that you're seeking that all the time?
Yeah, I think also science is inherently creative. And I think you can only be a good scientist and if you are also creative. For me, I also like visual things. Fun fact, I have aphantasia, so I actually can't picture things in my mind.
Hold on, what? So you can't picture anything?
No, I can't picture anything.
What?
I don't dream in pictures either. I only realized this a few years ago.
You don't dream in pictures? This feels like it needs to be a show on its own.
The research on this has amplified over the last couple of years, and we've realized that probably like 2 to 7% of the population can't picture anything, and most people don't realize it until they try to picture something.
I can't just let this go. This is too interesting. So when you dream, do you recall your dreams?
I do, but it's stories, feelings. It's more like, think of an audiobook, but you're not picturing anything, or associations or feelings. And there are stories, but there's no pictures. You asked me earlier if I get vicarious trauma, basically, is what you asked, from the cases that I work on. And there's new research out which has found that people who have aphantasia are much better first responders, and they're better at working in highly distressing fields because we don't have flashbacks to those scenes. There also seems to be, and this is purely a hypothesis that I'm working with right now.
Go on.
As someone who does a lot of so I do a lot of speaking, so corporate speaking. And so I'm in lots of very different spaces. So yesterday I was at LinkedIn.
Were you?
A couple days ago I was talking to market researchers. The week before that I was talking to people in finance. And occasionally I also talk to like Adobe or other creative industries. So I do a task where you close your eyes and picture an apple. And then I ask people to picture, it's red, it's visual, you can almost touch it. And then I say, okay, open your eyes. Who just saw blank? And people initially go, what do you mean? And then the hands will start going up. And people go, wait, did I actually see an apple? Or did I just think about an apple? And it's on a spectrum. And so some people have it sort of hyper realistic. And other people have it more as a sketch. And some people have nothing. I find that in creative industries, people actually seem to have more aphantasia.
Really?
And I think maybe that's why we like art. The reason that I like...
Because then you're seeing it so literally in front of you.
So I love working with a PowerPoint or a Keynote as a canvas. I love creating things. I love going to museums because I never have that inside my head. And so I have to rely on the real world for doing it.
There's so much here about you, the way you dissect memory, the way you talk about memory, our gaps in our memory, our false memories. But you give these talks in business, right? In the corporate world, you go out there and discuss it. Give us a little bit of detail there about how you deliver that and how you educate people and what it is about that people can find so either engaging or surprising for the very first time.
When I go into corporate settings and speak about making memorable messaging, what I often get asked about is, Julia, how do we get people to remember our brand? And the ways around that are basically educating people on how memory works, that a memory is at best, a multisensory experience. And so you're associating things that you see, hear, maybe smell, taste, think. And when you are recalling a brand, for example, of course, what you want is for people to recall all of those different components, or the other way around, to have enough of a memory so people remember your brand at all, especially for smaller ones. And I think people sometimes go, oh, well, we have to be really emotional. No, only if you can make it personally relevant. And personally relevant in sort of cliche versions, perfume commercials where they're suddenly running through the... That's not personally relevant. I mean, it's a story, and there's sort of this history of making it cinematic, but beauty isn't necessarily catchy. What's catchy is something that I can immediately do something with, immediately applies to my life, or that I know is going to actually improve it. And so in terms of breaking through the noise, there are ways in which you can get people's attention, and attention is absolutely fundamental, right? So attention is the glue between reality and your memory. If you don't have people's attention, you've got nothing. There's no such thing as subliminal advertising. It doesn't really happen. I mean, in the sense of, you've got something positioned in a TV show, that's not really subliminal. That's just product placement. That's different. Because if the person doesn't perceive the marketing, they're still not going to be influenced anyway. And so attention is crucial. That's one thing. But then getting people to remember it is way beyond emotion. And it goes into having these narratives that are crafted that are ideally personalized, or at least speak to something that can be self-reflective rather than just a piece of information.
I love that. I do a lot of work with brands, and they're so busy chasing, so in sports or music, the opening, the launch, the lights out and away we go, the first whistle. They forget the bit afterwards. I've called it the aftermath economy. The aftermath is where you're kind of wide-eyed and thinking about what's just been. So you might imagine coming out of that incredible concert that you went to, or the confetti on the floor and the lights have gone up of the club, or coming back from the stadium with a loved one. And you normally unpack that in group chats on, let's say, WhatsApp, or you stick photos up in a carousel, or you might start making a playlist from the tracks you heard that night, because that's where the memories are made. That's what I say the brands should be involved with at that moment, not the bit before.
Yeah, and being able to relate to that aftermath of what is it you want the person to feel and take with them into their lives, rather than just being like, hey, here's who we are, here's some facts about us. That rarely works. What works is, here's who you will be. And again, I feel like, remember the Bacardi Breezer commercials?
Of course.
Again, classic, where everyone's dancing, having a great time. And basically every alcohol commercial for a long time was just like, you will have friends and it will be fun.
Yeah.
And so you're basically selling friendship. And again, that works to a point, but are they going to remember your brand specifically? Maybe. And so there's these other bits of it that really matter. And so I think for understanding even the basics of that, though, you do need to understand just how memory works, how it fails, how false memories can happen, and how we do fill in these blanks. And that can be to your favor or to your disadvantage, because you can also kind of control how you shape the narrative.
I have to get on because I need to ask you about green crime. Let's start. You mentioned earlier, I just want to get into, you were talking about the anxiety or fear perhaps we have when, for example, environmental issues. I always perhaps talk about someone like my son. He's just turned 17. I remember years ago, he was very kind of aware that they taught in schools. He was understanding things like the Paris Climate Treaty. And he sort of said, we can't do it all. And I felt terrible because he actually felt this weight of this world on their shoulders. Tell me, though, a little bit about your workings with it.
So in addition to the work I do on memory and AI that I've been doing for a long time, I've also always been interested in how we can tell compelling stories, specifically reaching people or meeting people where they already are. And true crime is this huge genre which really fascinates people. And sure, you could have one version of it where you go, it's kind of trashy. At times it's exploitative. At times it is. It's gory. It sort of feels like this guilty pleasure. What is it that people love about it? Yet people do find it fascinating. And ultimately, I think it's such a wonderful starting point for profound ethical questions, right? So when we think about the worst things that people do to each other, the worst things that we're capable of, crime, murder, serial killing, sexual assault, what that opens the door for is, who are we as human beings? What does psychological research say about the ways we think and do and behave and how we relate to each other and how that can go sour, but also how we can fix it? So for me, I've always seen true crime as a really good mechanism for making science accessible to a wider audience. Plus, you're already in that sort of justice-related, ethics-related topic, which allows you to think more profoundly about, what kind of society do we actually want to live in. That's not always where true crime takes it.
Of course.
But when I host true crime, that's where it goes.
That's where it goes. But that notion of the mirror being held up and querying, questioning even yourself, and gosh, is it a fine line between what seems like a normal life and could this even be me?
Right. And in my book, Making Evil, that is something I explore, is basically how any one of us is capable of the worst things we can think of. And in each chapter, I walk from the smallest version of the thing, so being passive-aggressive, being a bit annoying to other people on purpose, all the way, say, to sadism and murder. So I think that there are these pathways that we can look at, and you can see from the everyday small versions of those same things how sometimes with not many steps, but often with quite a few steps, you can get to this much more extreme societally damaging behavior. And that's what we want to prevent. But if we don't talk about it as that kind of pathway, we underestimate our own capacity for doing harm, and we overestimate and other. So we create this barrier between people who are doing these things and ourselves, and ultimately that can lead us to monsterizing and justifying atrocities against those people whom we've decided are not really people at all.
Yeah, so there's a complete delineation, and these guys are, and then there's a framing of mental or mad or whatever.
Or they're bad, I'm good.
Yeah.
They're evil, I'm good.
But only by embracing the steps or that pathways you describe it, or at least having an understanding of it, can you perhaps stop yourself or see those traits in others be something that maybe they should be speaking to someone about.
Correct. And so from that, I wrote that as my second book. And then my most recent book, Green Crime, Inside the Minds of the People Destroying the Planet and How to Stop Them. In that book, I basically saw it as this experiment. Everything I do in my life is an experiment.
Clearly.
I'm a scientist. But as far as a life, I see it very much as that. And so Green Crime was an experiment for me to see whether I can combine true crime storytelling with criminal psychology and apply it to this existential risk that we're facing and that almost everyone thinks about. So if you look at surveys on how many people think about climate change on a daily or weekly basis, it's most people. So a big UN survey across 77 countries found that the majority of people across all of those countries think about it every day or every week.
Wow.
And so this isn't sort of this fringe issue. And the question is, why aren't we creating more interesting stories and true crime stories around that to really tap into that and to cover that?
So almost leveraging the same, almost by the way it resonates in us almost biologically, which you are so aware of within true crime, you're saying that it's kind of triggering the same set of emotions actually.
It should be. It should
really
be triggering the same emotions. If we can't make environmental issues, topics, science connect with people, then we're doing it wrong. And so I think we should keep trying, because one of the things that I find really sad is that when I speak to commissioners or when I speak to people about environmental issues, even if I'm framing it as, and this person got murdered, and really this is a hunt for the person who killed them and why. And the reason they got killed is because they were protecting this part of the Amazon. And ultimately, this detective had to work through this organized crime ring to get, to the truth. Even then, people go, yeah, but it's about the trees though, isn't it? And I'm going, no, it's about the people. What are you talking about? And it's this, and it's this real miscategorization, I think, as well, of environmental crimes, which are crimes. I'm not talking just about harms. I mean crimes like, breaking the law in the Volkswagen case and lying, installing a defeat device into your cars that is literally lying to regulators about how much your cars are polluting. That is just corporate fraud at scale.
Absolutely. In the 80s, I assume in Canada, it was certainly here when I was a boy growing up in England, the ozone layer was the big kind of green climate kind of conversation. There is a hole in the ozone layer, everyone. Stop using aerosols and throw out your fridges. And it basically happened, as far as I'm aware, the hole in that ozone layer kind of got reduced down. Was there a learning there that we should be taking now into the more immediate climate emergency which is upon us?
No.
Good answer.
10 or 20 years before that, you would have been in the Great Smog, potentially, and you would have had these major smog incidents, which we were having in London or LA, and that was a big topic because the air was so bad that it was immediately affecting your ability to breathe outside. And so people suddenly went, we need to do something about air pollution. And that's where we got our regulation and our laws around air pollution, which now have succeeded so well that London's air hasn't been this clean possibly since it's been a city.
But you hardly hear that.
I know, it's wild. It's a huge success story. Our air is so clean, and that's partly because we have systematically introduced these rules that make carbon emissions, that regulate carbon and NOx emissions, and that have introduced more electric cars. And so certainly on a local level, the air we are breathing is much better for our health than it has been in a very, very long time. And cities around the world are benefiting from this. And so where there is strong regulation around it, that is a direct impact to you and your family immediately. As part of my research for Green Crime, I spoke with people at various environmental agencies. We're also actually just did a talk at the UK Environmental Agency.
Wow.
All their investigators who investigate environmental crimes had a big conference.
Really?
And there's hundreds of them.
There's a lot to unpack there. Like, what's the conference like?
Well, the conference is much like you'd expect for a lot of things.
Are they like other investigators?
They're like police.
That's what...
They're like environmental police and environmental detectives.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a job. And we definitely need to fund that. But also because it pays back immediately, because what you usually get is not just a cleaner environment, but you also get money from fines because they're breaking laws that they're cheating the system. Yeah. And so they shouldn't be cheating the system.
So is that a growing industry?
It should be, but it's not.
Right.
Because not enough people know it exists, and people still have this idea that regulations are inherently negative. I opened the book with an interview with the regulator who caught the Volkswagen scandal, who basically exposed it. And he says, we all think that, regulators, it's all red tape and it's all very annoying. But as soon as something goes wrong, so the water is brown, we realize, we call for how the regulators failed or how the system's failing. As soon as the water's clear, we forget about their role entirely, even though the only way it can be clear is because they work tirelessly in the background. And so we take for granted the things that are easy, and we only notice friction points. And that's a really big human problem in general.
Solvable human problem?
We just need to fund it. We just need to take it seriously and fund it and treat environmental crimes and environmental problems as real problems akin to violent crime.
These should be the news stories. This should be the news cycle. You have to seek positive stories, angles, spins. It's quite the search. It's quite hard work sometimes, isn't it, to find such things on your normal social feeds. But this is the good stuff, right?
Yeah, which is why I wrote my book, because I felt...
Which is coming out in paperback
soon? Yeah,
this fall?
It's out already in hardback, and it'll come out in paperback at some point. But yeah, it came out last autumn. It came out autumn 2025. And it started some really good conversations directly with environmental investigators and regulators, but also with the public around, all of the cases I use, there is effectively, or most of the cases, there's a happy ending. And that's on purpose because I want to show from beginning to end, here is what happens, why it happens, the psychology of the perpetrators, which is similar to the psychology of other kinds of crime and is really interesting. It's not less interesting because it's environmental. And it's not just about greed. That is a minority of the motivation. That is just one piece. There's so many things you could be doing to make money. Why choose environmental things? And so there's these other psychological factors. Plus, there are lots of cases where people get caught and fined or imprisoned. And why are we pretending that that's not the case? It is so much more interesting and motivating to see a case from beginning to end, like we do in true crime, where the end of the story is, and then he got 20 years in prison. That should be the case for environmental stories, not, and then they keep getting away with it. Because also what sign is that sending to potential environmental criminals is, if you want to do this, you're going to get away with it.
There's been huge cases recently where an ITV show here in the UK has suddenly uncovered an issue that was 10 years old and has suddenly become a national fraud and so on, because that's the nature of the beast. Do you envisage we might be in a similar situation, or maybe your book can open the doors a little bit?
I really hope so. So I went to an International Space Agency conference.
Of course you did. You're alive.
Well, I was there speaking at a corporate gig, and it happened to be on. And so I popped around, and I
just pop in.
thought I'd see what they're doing
What were they chatting about?
The European Space Agency. And the theme was specifically about imaging the Earth. And some of the talks, or quite a lot of the talks, were about the radical new tools that we have to, at the root level, monitor from space what's happening at, and on a very small scale on Earth and in the Earth. Wow. And so you can track, even through tree cover, for example, or into the oceans, you can track quite a lot of what's going on and what's being changed, which helps you to identify environmental crimes that are happening that might otherwise not have been identified because they're happening in remote areas.
What you're describing is also the very best kind of nature docs we've ever seen in our life, that we're underground, in the sea, treetops.
And a lot of it's open source. So Google Earth, for example, just provides quite a lot. You can do quite a lot of analysis using the European Space Agency data for free. And you can literally ask people at Google to help you use their tool to mine this data. So if you're a researcher, for example, that's really useful. But even as a creative, if you're just trying to show what's happening to the Earth and how it's changing. And there as well, there's downsides. So they were very worried about what was happening in the US and the collaboration because, different people have different motivations when it comes to climate data and environmental data. And if data goes missing, potentially, it can just be gone forever. Yeah. And that can be a really big problem if you're trying to build a case for change over a long period of time. And so the European Space Agency is very concerned about geopolitical things as well. But overall, you're absolutely right that I think it's awe-inspiring. I think most people are thinking about this all the time.
But you seem like a rare voice that's bridging several worlds here for the very first time.
Yeah.
Is that going to be, do you see this being the you of the next few years? What's next coming from you? What can we look out for?
I do think there's going to be this huge new wave of researchers who are applying social scientific issues to helping us to save the planet. But I have a short attention span.
Relentlessly restless.
Yeah, and there's only so much I can bang on commissioners' doors and say, please make this into a thing. I think this will be great, and people are interested. And they just turn and say, but green things, we don't like green things. But the enthusiasm around AI, I think, is going to be where I go next. So over the next couple of months, I'm working at an organization where I'm specifically embedding myself in London's ecosystem around AI governance and policy work.
Go on.
And so there the question is, how do we make sure that the AI systems that we're building are founded on social scientific principles, but also are ethically sound and don't become an existential risk?
And are there lots of the equivalents of you involved? Is it like a Jedi Council of Knowledge? I love the fact that you are involved, by the way. That gives me, again, hope. But how does that work?
It's a residency you apply for.
Got it.
And there's I think they screened like 14,000 people, and there's 50 of us though in the cohort, so it is quite a big cohort.
Great.
And I think the point of it is lateral entry, so it's non-technical people, so not people who are already working in AI, building AI.
Brilliant.
It's people from other fields of research who want to be involved in this world and who have been filtered to be people who just will make magic in the room. So in about 3 months at the end of the summer, who knows who I'll be, because that's the whole point of the next 3 months, is seeing what's actually happening in AI and where social scientists can help to make it safer, more efficient, and to really help to revolutionize how we interact with one another as human beings.
What a brilliant note to end on, Julia. I'm now thrilled at the prospect of the summer ahead. Today has felt educational, very inspiring. You filled me with thoughts and ideas, but above all, a sense of positivity. So I thank you for that, and thank you so much for coming on board.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCo Pod, subscribe on Spotify, hit the subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios here in King's Cross. Produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt, and it's edited by Emma Gifford. Special thanks to Craig Hepsonstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.